All right. Hello. It is the Friday Roundup, and we have some new tools. I got my little lavalier mic on, see if the sound is better. Wow. Whew. Every week is 10 years, okay? 10 years. So we started the week looking at the anti-DEI crowd, but they're not the crowd you think they are. They're the people who do diversity, equity, inclusion work who think we need to move away from those words. Don't say the acronym, which is absolutely ludicrous. And I rooted my first newsletter this week in what Stacey Abrams had said in an interview where she said, it's like a child trying to play hide and seek in the middle of the room with their eyes closed. They're going to find you anyway. Whatever you call it, they're going to go against it because they don't agree with the aims. And people who are advocating this are not either understanding or they don't care about the impact of anti-Black bias. And they are not perpetuating liberation for all. They're perpetuating access to patriarchy for some. And someone like one of the quotes from the article, which is, you can't build a sustainable pedagogy on the sandcastle of self-interest. So there's that. Check that out. And then I talked about Breonna Taylor's life and its worth to the Department of Justice of one day, or essentially nothing at all, and how the Department of Justice, which is supposed to be representing her, was really advocating for the person who was a participant in the no-knock raid that killed her. And then I tied that to the princess life, which is basically repackaged emotional abuse in the domestic violence wheel of power and control, for anybody who's familiar with that. So the wheel of power control is not just physical violence, but there's emotional, financial, and all these other elements. And these young women who are perpetuating this princess lifestyle and the trad wife, where they defer wholly, totally to men, and they're supposed to make diapers and applesauce. And the people doing this online are wealthy. They're hiding all the stuff that happens behind the curtain. But, you know, young women are primed to believe some of this. And this is not just happening in a vacuum. There are conservative forces that are trying to use social media to convince young women to give up their bodily autonomy, their financial independence, and their legal independence. That's really only maybe 45 to 50 years that women have had that. Already, a lot of young women have given up birth control, convinced that it is the worst thing on earth. Now, it's not the best for everybody, but there is something going on. And the reason I tie that to Breonna Taylor is because, look, that's not for everybody. When Black women were having children, I remember they called Black women every filthy name in the book, called them welfare queens, said they need to have their tubes tied. They were having too many children. So obviously having children staying at home is for some women, primarily white women, and not for Black women. But none of these paradigms around trad wife or princess life are good for women. Sure, people can make a decision to stay at home and take care of their kids. There's nothing wrong with that. But these paradigms go much farther than that. And we see that the protection of young women, with everybody up in arms about the Epstein case, doesn't extend to young Black women. You know, Laken Riley, a young woman who was killed by a person who was here illegally in the United States, her killer got life, which he should have, but immediately there was an act passed in her name. Where is the Breonna Taylor No Knock Raid Act? These are questions we have to ask. Then I did a newsletter about Jim Crow 2.0, which I got a strange pushback from a person of color actually online who said I was being divisive. I'm just reporting the news. The fact of the matter is, the Trump administration is actively, hurriedly moving to remove the vestiges of the civil rights movement in the 60s, including getting rid of anti-segregation or getting rid of segregation consent decrees, meaning allowing schools to resegregate. And when you look at their hostility to the presence of Black folks in predominantly white institutions, attacking student loans, attacking apprenticeships, they are attacking us on every level. And then you have President Trump with his deep fake video of President Barack Obama being arrested and thrust to his knees at Donald Trump's feet while Donald Trump smiled. That's not just some silliness, that's a threat. And the thing of it is that happened at the end of Reconstruction. Black political figures were killed, terrorized out of office, threatened. Their pictures were burned. They were ripped out of pages of any book that said they were there. And that is what Donald Trump is expressing. And I also, in that article, talked about Pete Hegseth playing a smarter playing the smartass. And instead of renaming these bases after actual Confederates, they're trying to find other people who have the same last names as the Confederates to reestablish Confederate bases. So this is the restoration of white supremacy that happened at the end of Reconstruction. The Confederacy has never died. The Confederates are insurrectionists to this country. They lost the damn war. And yet this strong desire to honor the Confederates tells you they never lost. They never lost. And so the fact that we are in a Jim Crow 2.0 should not be a surprise to anyone. And it is not hyperbole. Unfortunately, the cumulative efforts of this administration are underreported in this regard. And the Urban League recently issued a state of emergency around civil rights for African Americans. And that is no lie. That is a fact. And the tidal wave we see in the number of Black women who are losing their jobs, which we're going to talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. But yeah, I mean, that article on the fact that we are in a Jim Crow 2.0, I quote the Delaney sisters, two women who lived through the end of Reconstruction and Jim Crow into the civil rights and into the modern day. They died in their hundreds. Yeah, in their hundreds. And one of them said the reason they believe Jim Crow started was because Black folks were getting too much. They were getting educated. They were getting, the piece of the pie. They were moving forward, and powerful white folks couldn't have that. Sounds a lot like Mark Andreessen saying the last 60 years have disadvantaged Trump voters, which basically sounds like he's meaning white people, right? So everything old is in fact new again. And then the question people say, well, what am I supposed to do? Should I know this? You need to know it because we need how to fight. We need to know how to fight back. It's not using DEI letters. It's not using DEI that's going to change something. What's going to change something are nationwide strikes, using our financial power collectively together, resisting in every way, fighting at the ballot box at the midterms like our lives depend on it, because our lives do. Like, these are the real things that we need to focus on. All that other stuff is noise, right? And then I had a great conversation with Christian Ortiz, who runs Justice AI. I just had that one on Thursday. And he also is a social scientist looking at how we decolonize our minds, our institutions, and our systems, including AI. And we talked about, so many fabulous things, and how the AI database is made up of white supremacist information. Obviously, I mean, that's, if you're using certain groups' information, and then at the same time, Donald Trump signed this executive order saying you can't have woke AI, the consequences for African Americans and other people of color are devastating. And those consequences really will be, rooted in areas of healthcare, credit, and employment. This is where we see AI using negative racial stereotyping. I mean, this could lead to deaths, inappropriate treatment, lack of access to credit, and lack of access to employment. And I don't think it's a mistake. I think it's planned. I used the Bible verse in the Jim Crow article saying, all things work together for the good for those who love God, but all things also work together toward evil for those whose plans are evil. And we have to recognize that. And so today's newsletter is kind of that wrap up, but drum roll. I'm also teasing an introduction next week of some new things. So one of the reasons I wrote my book, Qualified, right up there, how competency checking and race collided work, was the data that was coming in 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, for Black women in the workplace. I saw that Black women were losing their jobs at an alarming rate. I mean, an alarming rate then. And at that point, when I was writing the book, the unemployment rate for Black women was like 4.some%. Now it's 6.7%. And there was just information that over 300,000 Black women disappeared from the workplace in a month. This shedding is very much in line with what happened at the end of Reconstruction. And so what I want to do is something I'm going to be calling the Zora Project. It's part of Qualified at the Intersection, but monthly I want to tell the stories of Black women who have lost their jobs and who believe that those job losses are related to anti-DEI, race-based removal, and that type of thing. I really want to capture these stories because some of you may know Zora Neale Hurston got on her motorcycle and drove through the South and collected these stories that are now in the National Archives for now, until I guess Donald Trump threw them in the garbage. But it's important to capture these stories. So I'm going to talk more about that next week and what that's going to look like. The other thing is a new training is coming from my consulting company, ITBOM. It's going to be, what's the state of play with ERGs? I'm going to go into detail, looking at the executive orders, looking at the DOJ and the EEOC, and giving you a tiered response for what you can do with your ERGs, depending on the type of organization you have. That will be behind the paywall. I've said to folks that I want to keep the newsletter and the comments free and not behind a paywall, but I want to put things of value behind the paywall. And I feel like the state of play for the ERGs, which is going to be professionally shot by me, that's why I got my new little mic here, is going to be more than worthwhile for people to sign up for a paid subscription. And then the other thing is ITBOM, my consulting company. I'm going to be using my over a decade experience as a journalist, a news anchor and a reporter, and as a published author and keynote speaker to offer marketing, communication, PR, crisis management, and other assistance for companies and individuals. And then I also am going to expand my communication offerings for those whose workplaces are in communication-based conflict. So a lot of people, spending a lot of money on this, are you a red, are you a blue communicator, your disc type and all that, and they still are having a ton of communication-based problems in their workplace. And so I'm going to be talking a bit about what my new offerings around that will be. So that's what's going on next week. This is the wrap up. I'm so excited to tell you about each of those projects. The first 3 newsletters of next week, each newsletter will focus on one of these projects. And so much goes on. South Park. I'm worried for them, but it was a great episode. So have a great weekend, everyone.